Welcome to our series of short videos all about the academic staff at GGE. My name is Lucy Clark, a first year BSc Geography student. I'm keen to get to know staff in the school and find out not just what kind of research and teaching they do, but what inspired them and inspires them about their field. Today I'm talking to Mick Whelan, a Professor of Physical Geography. Hi Mick, thank you for joining me today. So I read a little about you and I gather much of your work is based around hydrology. And I presume it's like quite a complex branch of science and not as simple as like the water cycle diagrams you might find in an A-level textbook, for example. So could you just tell me a little more about what actually comes into hydrology?
So fundamentally, hydrology is about understanding and quantifying water stores and fluxes. So this could be at different scales. It could be the whole planet, but it could also be down to an individual field on a farm, for example. So I mainly work in terrestrial freshwater hydrology, which is concerned with understanding water and material fluxes. So that might mean pollutants, for example, in river catchments.
Yeah.
And the basic ideas that you will have covered in your high school science classes or A-level geography syllabuses basically are the same, but you're right that I think to suggest that perhaps they were a little bit simplified. And so one key difference between what you might have done at A-level and what we do at university lies in the level of detail that we go into in terms of how the hydrological processes operate. So, for example, what drives evapotranspiration, what drives soil water movement and the different runoff pathways. And we're also more quantitative. So we try and actually calculate the different components of the water balance.
Yeah, so it's a lot about explaining and also like going into detail of like what's happening and quantifying that.
Yeah, quite a bit more detail and quite a bit more quantitative.
Yeah, okay, that sounds really interesting. So I presume you found your passion quite early on, as I believe you did a PhD in applied hydrology. So what led you to doing this PhD in particular?
Okay, so I was quite interested in hydrology as an undergraduate and particularly in water quality. So I did a couple of undergraduate modules. One was focused on upland water quality issues, which I found really interesting. And a PhD opportunity arose in Leeds, where I was an undergraduate, to look at the factors controlling the transfer of nitrogen, particularly nitrate, from agricultural catchments. And that looked really interesting to me. So, and at the time, nitrate concentrations were increasing in many catchments across the UK, and in some, the levels regularly exceeded the EU limit for drinking water quality. So in my PhD, I developed a model to describe the transfer of nitrogen from agricultural catchments. And I really liked the idea that my research was connected to something real and that could potentially have some impact, for example, to better manage nitrogen in agricultural catchments, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, a lot of your work sort of focuses then on like chemicals going down the drain, sort of thing. So what other sorts of chemicals do you search, or is it just about the nitrogen nitrates?
Yeah, I kind of moved on from nitrogen, so I'm still interested in nitrogen, but then I sort of widened my interest to phosphorus, which is another important nutrient. And then I also got involved in a project between 1996 and 1999. I worked as a postdoctoral scientist at the University of Milan in Italy. And I was employed on a project which was funded by the European detergent industry. And they were looking at ways to better model river pollution by chemicals, which are used in mainly home and personal care products. So that's the kind of thing that you might find in a shampoo or a shower gel or in a laundry detergent. And after you finish with that product, the wastewater then goes into the sewer and heads off to the sewage treatment works. And the levels are substantially reduced in sewage treatment, but not completely. And so you get a discharge from a sewage treatment works with these chemicals, and they have the potential to cause toxic effect on the wildlife which lives in the receiving waters. So we need to know how these chemicals behave. For example, how quickly do they degrade and their toxicities in order to manage them. So which chemicals should we allowed to be used and which ones should be banned, for example. So that's, I work on nutrients still, but I'm also still quite involved in the down the drain chemical fate and effects.
Yeah, so it's clearly a very important thing if it can like affect ecosystems around it and things like that. It's definitely important. Okay. So as for getting out into the field, I assume you like getting out and researching a variety of places because it sounds like you're very hands-on with what you do. So when it comes to fieldwork related to your research, what sorts of things do you do when you go out into the field?
Okay, so most of my work actually is basically about building numerical models and using numerical models. But I love fieldwork, and I think it's really important to get out and see the systems that you're trying to describe with your models. So I do regularly do field work. Some of that is relatively short-term monitoring campaigns to try and understand, for example, chemical degradation in river channels. And for that, we use dye tracing to track how long it takes for solute to travel down the river. And we use that as a guide for collecting samples. And then I also get involved in catchment studies, so longer term studies where we actually monitor water quality. So, for example, looking at pesticide transfers from agricultural land to surface waters. And that involves setting up monitoring at the catchment outlet with, for example, automatic water samplers that collect the samples and then you bring those back to the lab and analyze them. And you also need to measure the river discharge. So we also monitor the flux of water as well as measuring the concentrations of the chemicals.
Okay, cool. So also leading on, I guess, from like fieldwork and stuff, you run a trip to the Lake District, don't you?
I do.
Well, I'll be joining you in second year for that. So what can myself or anyone that goes on it expect? Like, what would we get up to?
Okay, so this is a trip we run every year, and it relates to two of the physical geography modules which we run in semester 2 of second year. Catchment systems and dynamic biosphere. So you probably be doing at least one of those, but maybe both. And we run 3 field days. So the first one is mainly connected to the dynamic biosphere, but also it sort of intersects with the hydrology bit of catchment systems. And that's all about hydrology, soil properties, and vegetation on hill slopes, looking at how vegetation communities change down the slope transect. And in parallel, you see quite major changes in soil properties. And that's all kind of driven by the hydrology. The second day is connected to the catchment water balance. So on that day, we measure river discharge using current metering and a technique called salt dilution gauging. And it's all about really setting up the catchment systems module. And then on the third day is all about integration, really. So we look at how different components of the landscape interact to affect things like carbon storage and water quality. So I think after a long summer for both students and lecturers, it's a great way to re-energize and engage with the coming semester. It's usually really good fun, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Okay, so since you graduated, you've like worked with a lot of companies in industry and stuff like that. So do you think that what and how you teach would be different if you didn't spend time working in industry?
Absolutely, yeah. So in fact, my work on down the drain chemicals in Italy eventually led to me being employed by Unilever, which is a big manufacturer of home and personal care products. And at Unilever, I basically worked on environmental risk assessment of chemicals. And then I decided that I really liked academia after all and came back. So my background in hydrology and understanding of water quality, I think really influenced my decision and recruitment by Unilever and what I did there. Yeah. And then coming back to academia, it's definitely affected what I teach. I think my third year module on water quality processes and management, particularly, is really connected to that experience with industry. So I cover synthetic organic pollutant behavior and effects in that module. And I'm also very mindful of employment opportunities in the environmental sector, not just in the companies that make these chemicals and use them. So, for example, environmental regulation, the Environment Agency in England and Wales, or Natural Resources Wales, or SEPA in Scotland, and environmental consultancy. So I kind of keep one eye always on employment opportunities and try and make the module, tailor the module to those opportunities. And quite a few of my students have gone on to work in the environmental sector, which is really satisfying.
Yeah, I bet that's really rewarding to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we finish up then, what projects are you working on now, or what are you planning for the future? What sort of things are you focusing on?
Okay, so I've just started a new project this year. So I'm working with one of our new PhD students, Rob Newbold, and another colleague at Leicester, Mark Powell, on trying to better understand how quickly organic chemicals, the down the drain chemicals we've just been talking about, degrade in river channels, with a specific focus on the role of hydraulic geometry and bed load as controls on biodegradation by microbes. So it's kind of bringing the water quality side, the hydrology side, and a bit of fluvial geomorphology that Mark Powell does together. So the idea is that microbes in the river live in communities, in fixed biofilms on the bed and bank material. And we know that they're very critical in breaking down some of these pollutants. And so we hypothesize that the bulk degradation rate in the channel, so how quickly the chemical degrades and the concentrations go down, will be related to the surface area available for colonization by these microbes. So that's related to the particle size distribution on the bed, but also by the water depth. So we hypothesize that when water depths are low and the river's shallow, there'll be more contact between the water column and the bed sediment, and therefore rates of degradation will be faster. So that's really exciting, and that's just starting up. And I also, another thing that keeps me busy is I sit on the coordination team for a big UK-wide research program called Landscape Decisions. And that's all about basically trying to make better evidence-based decisions about how land is used and managed in primarily the UK, for example, to enhance biodiversity, sequester carbon in soils, and reduce the impact of agriculture on water quality. So that's really exciting. That gives me an opportunity to work with other researchers across the UK, and including interaction with the policymakers. So that's something that's really exciting too.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of good stuff coming up then.
Yeah,
okay,
keeps me busy.
Yeah, I bet it does. Well, thank you for your time, Mick, and also thank you to everyone who's watched this episode. Be sure to check out our other episodes to learn about other academic staff in the School of Geography, Geology and the Environment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. See you in the Lake District.
See you.